Many survivors describe the most destructive person in their life as someone who never raised their voice. They never threw a punch. They never issued a direct threat. Yet over months or years, the target of their attention finds their peace, identity, and confidence entirely collapsed. Narcissism functions as a control system. It is a calculated set of tactics used to dominate and destabilize the people closest to the abuser. This process remains invisible to the outside world because the damage is psychological. The marks aren't on the skin. They exist as shattered self-esteem, chronic anxiety, and a perception of reality that has been systematically distorted. This invisibility creates a specific kind of danger. The victim often spends years believing they are the problem, unaware that their environment has been carefully engineered to trap them. The early stages of the relationship are characterized by love bombing. This involves an intense, overwhelming flood of affection, excessive flattery, and a pressure to commit with unnatural speed. This diagram represents the neurological response to that intensity. The constant positive reinforcement floods the reward centers with dopamine and oxytocin, the same chemicals involved in substance addiction. As these chemical spikes repeat, the brain begins to prioritize this person as a primary survival reward. This creates a physical dependency known as a trauma bond. The glowing particles eventually solidify into a bond so rigid that it functions like a lock, making the prospect of leaving feel like a physical withdrawal. This chart shows the long-term psychological goal of this phase. This line shoots upward to establish a peak of perfect connection. This becomes the baseline, a permanent memory of how the relationship should be. When the abuse eventually starts, the brain is already hijacked. The victim stays, expending all their energy trying to return to that artificial baseline, rather than recognizing the current reality of the relationship. Eventually, the admiration becomes conditional. The abuser begins to withdraw affection unpredictably, forcing the victim to monitor their own behavior and chase the approval they once received for free. The abuser also begins to isolate the victim, often framing their criticism of friends and family as an act of protection. They suggest that outside influences are toxic or jealous, slowly shrinking the victim's support network until they have no outside perspective to verify their reality. This diagram illustrates a tactic called triangulation. The top node, the narcissist, introduces a third party into the dynamic. Whether it's an ex-partner or a new friend, the abuser uses this person to manufacture competition and insecurity. In this state, the victim's attention is directed away from the abuser's behavior. As the bottom lines vibrate with the stress of competition, all emotional energy flows upward, reinforcing the narcissist's position as the ultimate judge and prize. By dismantling external lifelines and creating internal chaos, the abuser ensures the victim depends on them exclusively for emotional stability. This dependency allows for the most direct form of cognitive attack, gaslighting.
This is the systematic dismantling of a person's memory and perception. Through constant denial and contradiction, the abuser trains the victim to stop trusting their own mind. The process typically follows these 3 stages. It begins with disbelief of the abuser's lies, moves into a frantic defense of the truth, and finally dissolves into a state of depression, where the victim accepts the abuser's version of reality over their own. Alongside gaslighting, they use weaponized withdrawal, or the silent treatment. This is the sudden, total removal of communication as punishment for any perceived challenge to their control. Neurologically, social rejection activates the same pathways as physical injury. For the brain, the silent treatment is indistinguishable from physical pain, making it one of the most effective tools for conditioning a victim to stay silent. These tactics work in tandem. Gaslighting ensures you cannot trust your judgment, while the silent treatment ensures you are too afraid of the pain of abandonment to ever question the abuser again. To dismantle this system, you have to look at the motive. Beneath the grandiosity, narcissistic personalities are often driven by deep-seated shame and an empty sense of self. They rely on narcissistic supply, a constant flow of external validation and emotional reaction from others to mask this internal brokenness. When a victim attempts to leave, the abuser often deploys hoovering. they instantly return to the charming persona of the love bombing phase. This visual of shards pulling back together represents the temporary, fragile reconstruction of that original baseline. This return to kindness functions as a calculated test to see if they still have psychological access to the victim. It is a way to reset the cycle and pull the target back into the dynamic. Recognizing this pattern reveals a vital truth. The manipulation was never a response to your flaws. It was always a symptom of the abuser's deep inability to independently regulate their own internal sense of worth and security. Protection starts with disengagement. The gray rock method involves becoming as unreactive as a stone. By removing the emotional fuel they seek, you become less valuable as a source of supply. Documentation provides another layer of defense. Keeping a journal or screenshots creates an objective anchor to the truth that can be used whenever the abuser tries to rewrite the past. The most persistent wound from this abuse is the habit of self-betrayal. Over time, many victims are systematically conditioned to completely ignore their own intuition in order to avoid conflict. Healing requires a reversal of that process. Fiercely maintaining a support network, learning to trust gut instincts again, and seeking professional trauma therapy to address the physiological effects of the trauma bond. Awareness is the first step toward reclaiming your life. Once you understand the mechanics of the pressure being applied to you, you can stop blaming yourself for the reaction. You begin to see that your value is entirely separate from their need to control you.